Hello? I called out, because that's what you do when you walk into a room that you're not sure is empty. Standing in front of the window, facing away from me, was a tall, dark figure. The lamp on my bedside table was on and illuminated just enough of the room to cast shadows, but not bright enough to get a clear view of the person, just their silhouette. Ethan? I moved further into the room. When did you get here? I was excited and relieved he was back, so I walked faster past the bathroom to the end of the small wall that opened to the rest of the space, and regretted it instantly. I knew at that moment I had ignored my gut and that I should have run to the kitchen to get a knife or run outside to get help and scream or call for an army. Paige was standing near the foot of my bed. Her shoulders were hunched over and her arms dangled loosely to her sides. Her hands and fingers twitched spastically, and her body swayed oddly as her head jerked up to look at me. Her hair was bloody and matted to her neck and face. Clumps of it circled together, sticky and hard, while the rest lay plastered down against her scalp, smooth and shiny with wetness. Beads of blood dripped from the ends and landed on her bloody clothes. The clean, light-colored carpet now a drip-cloth to catch her leaky death. Her pallor was ashen, her eyes were hollow, sunken and black, and the once whiteness of the sclera in her eyes was bloodshot and dull yellow. Her pupils were cloudy, the vibrant blue now muted and gray, and a sound like congested breath wheezed through her skewed and gaping mouth. Paige? My voice trembled in question. Her head jerked and twisted at the sound. Her crazed eyes darted around in the sockets, absent and unfocused. I didn't know what would happen once I fed off her, Pike said as he turned around to face me. Pike? My heart jumped in my chest, and my voice was barely a whisper. I hoped she would be more like me. Alas, she woke a mindless drone. He sounded bored as he turned around from the window and walked over to her, and picked up a twisted lock of her matted hair. Rather disappointing, actually. His voice was laced with contempt. He dropped the hair he held and rubbed the red wetness between his forefinger and thumb before licking it off. She follows directions, though. That's something. He looked at me as she stumbled a few steps away from him, raised her arms, and drug her feet toward me. I was sure it was a demonstration on his part meant to scare me, and it worked. He killed you. I watched you die. I backed up each step she took toward me. Pike didn't answer me. He pulled his arms behind his back like I had seen him do many times while he was alive. He stood, unblinking, and watched as Paige continued forward, never taking his eyes from mine. His now the same sinister red as the Revenant who had killed him. Why? I asked through broken breath. The stranger before me had once been someone I'd grown to know as my friend. Now he was just as deadly and beastly as the creature who turned him. The fear and sadness laced heavily in my words, and as I flinched away from Paige and her proximity, my heart broke at the sight of her face. Why, what? He sneered. Why have I come? Why did I turn her? Why am I doing this? He took a few steps closer to me, and Paige came to a sudden halt. All good questions, Abby. His voice was changed, as if detached from the sound. All the warmth and kindness he'd once had, no longer there, and in its place was something sinister and cold. I did this. He pointed at Paige as if she were a thing, to see what would happen. Of course, I was hungry. I'm always hungry now. But mostly I was just curious. Poor girl, in the wrong place, at the wrong time. He said dismissively of her and what he had done. I thought she was you. This isn't you. This is not who you are. It is now. Blood and power and blood. It's all that consumes me now, Abby. I want more. I need more, and I'll do anything to get it. His voice was dead as he stalked toward me, like a cat hunting prey. His admission a serious threat. What do you want? I shrank away from him and his approach. I was terrified and all alone, and to think I had survived death just long enough to be killed by its neophyte. I came for Ethan. Where is Ethan? His voice twisted into a baleful curiosity. I don't know. My voice broke on the lie. I don't know. I shook my head and tried again. I took another step back, but was stopped by the wall behind me. He stood in front of me now, less than a foot apart. The smell of death on his tongue like the breath of whiskey on a drunk. I can smell him on you, he breathed. In you, coursing through your veins. He nearly whispered as he raised a hand, slowly bringing it to my face. I wanted to recoil, but I was scared stiff, too afraid to move. He pressed a frigid finger against my neck and ran it down the carotid artery and asked me again, "Where's Ethan?" The words caught in my throat and my lips trembled. I shook my head no, instead, in answer to his question. "Liar," he seethed. Pike reached up with his hand and wrapped his stony fingers around my chin and grabbed me tightly. The pressure was so great I knew I must be instantly bruised. He jerked my head to the side and held me in place as he bent his head and inhaled my scent at the base of my throat, up my neck. A deep, throaty rumble vibrated through his chest, the sound somewhere between a growl and a purr. "I wonder what you taste like, mixed with all his blood swimming inside of you," he mused in my ear. Pike dropped his head to my collarbone again and pressed his tongue to my throat, then licked up the length of my neck. "I always knew you'd taste good. I imagined what it would feel like to wrap my mouth around you and sink my teeth into your soft flesh. So elegant and enticing, tender and pliable. Such a unique flavor coursing through your pretty little veins. So rare. You're probably so sweet. But now, I bet you're utterly delectable." He flattened his tongue under my ear and rolled it up to suck on the lobe. Then he tightened his grip around my face and slammed my head into the wall. The air was rancid. That's what woke me, the stench of death. It was so strong it felt heavy and thick, like humid summer air next to a warm ocean. I could feel it around me like a fog, coating my nasal passages with each inhale, clinging to the delicate skin and sticking to the tiny hairs. I was careful not to open my mouth, afraid to taste the particles in the air. My wrists hurt from the binding around them, and my shoulders screamed out in pain. They were stretched beyond an uncomfortable limit. Pulled behind me, wrapped around a pole, and secured with something rigid and hard. My legs were left free and unbound, but they were so cold from the concrete that my bones ached and my joints throbbed. The back of my head pounded, the sore spot thrumming to the beat of my heart, each pulse a twinge and an ache as it hammered through my head. I opened my eyes, but my sight didn't reveal to me any additional information. It was so dark, but I wasn't alone. All around me was a chorus of wheezing, groaning, and gurgling breath that stirred and polluted the air with death. There was movement. The distinct sound of shuffling feet and shoes over a surface, and teeth as they clanked and ground together with the impact of an empty jaw. My legs were stiff and numb, and my feet were like ice. I bent my knees and pulled my calves against my thighs, and ignored the pain as I pressed my weight into my heels and inched my way up the pole. My thighs burned from exertion. My spine was sore from the pressure of the hard surface, and my skin felt on fire from the friction. Blood rushed through my legs and my feet now that the circulation was no longer cut off and the numbness was replaced with a needling tingle that traveled from the bottoms of my feet up into my hips. Even my arms prickled and pinned with the returning nerve sensation. Now that I was upright and standing, the room didn't seem as dark. Either my eyes were adjusting to the blackness, or I was somewhere where light could filter in from oncoming daybreak. With runty steps, I inched my way around the pole to get a better view of the room. I tried to assess my situation. I clenched my teeth and ignored the skin burns as the thin sheath around my wrist stretched and rubbed off with the movement. As I moved around, I saw the dimmest glow lightening the panes of glass in the windows of the room where I was captive. I couldn't be sure because it was still so dark, but I thought it might have been an industrial space. There were other pillars in the room, like the one I was shackled to. I couldn't see them clearly, just columns of dark against the muted light. The room was otherwise empty, besides the shadowy figures responsible for the smell and noise. I stopped when I saw them, only a quarter of the way around the post. My heart rate jumped to where I could hear the blood swoosh in my ears, and my breathing spiked as I shook. My heightened anxiety seemed to agitate the creatures, and their mindless shifting intensified in response. So did their groans of hunger. "Careful," a gnarly voice graveled from a distance. The strangled growl carried over the clamor of the dead, a deep bass that filled the room with dread. I whimpered. The sound of his voice set off every alarm in my body, but there was nothing I could do. I couldn't move. I couldn't protect myself. All I had with me was my voice, and that was worthless right now. Panic spread through my body. I knew that rasp. My body recognized it as it clenched in fear, my stomach aching with remembered pain. I'd heard it only once before, but it frightened me to the marrow in my bones. "You remember me," he crooned in my ear as the deep bass quaked through my startled body. I hadn't heard his approach. The kooks in the room stirred at the sound of his voice, their own deadly chatter whirring with a buzz. His cold breath stung my flesh and sent shivers down my spine. The space around him seemed to cool as he hovered, breathing, tainting and chilling the air. His respiration dark and hollow. My breath was shallow and fast, each inhale of his exhale as frigid as winter and as putrid as death. I fruitlessly pushed myself further against the pole and shrank away from him, but we were locked in place together, me unwillingly and him menacingly. For the longest time, he didn't move or speak. He just stood there in front of me, existing in finis. Abruptly, he turned away, and a loud growl ripped through his chest. The fury was so great it hurt my ears, and I flinched away. Something moved near me. The drag and shuffle of feet drew my attention and gave me a fresh worry. Panic shot through me, and I realized the Revenant didn't have full control over the creatures that loomed in the room. Not like Pike had seemed to have over Paige. Frantically, I worked the binding on my wrists. I tried to pull at the material to stretch it so I could get free, but I only made things worse. I broke open my skin. Whatever was holding my wrists together seemed to have found purchase in the soft flesh and sawed through me at the hint of movement. Another roar escaped the Revenant's lips. Then, the crack of a skull splitting and a body hitting the floor locked me into place. A hard hand wrapped around my throat and squeezed. "Don't move," he seethed. I didn't. I couldn't, even if I wanted to. The scuffle of dead slowed after a moment, and so did their avid cries. Their agitation seemed to simmer second by second until they were once again a mindless drone of surround sound. The light in the room shifted from dark to a blue hue, and I could see everything around me in the muted lambency. The creatures were no longer just shadowy figures, and the Revenant's face was as clear as a bell, his red eyes almost aglow now that they were catching the light. I tried to stay still, to calm and gather myself and my thoughts, but even my struggled breath around his firm grasp caused the tie around my wrist to slash deeper into my flesh. He panted noxiously in my face and groaned in time with the newest cut of my skin as the warmth slipped from the gash and grabbed his attention. The hand he pressed firmly against my throat tightened a fraction more. Then he shifted and moved his arms to swipe at my bound hands behind the pole. His icy fingers swept the trickle of blood that rolled down my hand, and with a deep rumble from his chest, he brought his dirty hand to his mouth to lap his fingers. "Vampire," he mewed at the taste of Ethan's blood in my system.